welcome back to another Fabulous channel. I'm Jacob from Jacob's Books Corner. Today we're going to be talking about my new reading vlog. In this reading vlog, I'll be reading 5 different titles. These are titles that have been recommended to me by friends, co-workers, people in general that I know. Some of these people I know really well, some of these people I don't really know at all. And so their taste and my taste might not interconnect, but they seem like they should. So let's talk about them. The way this video is going to work is that when I get into the book, I'll explain who recommended it to me, why they recommended it to me, and then we'll talk about the book at hand. And we'll do it one book at a time, so it's not like we're going to go through 5 books right here in the beginning. Early chapter times linked down below in case there's a book that you want to be specific about talking about. I don't know. If there's any spoilers, as I'm going to try to give this as no spoilers as possible, the screen will turn this color so you guys know to mute it in case you're interested in the book that I'm talking about. Also, 5 recommendation books, 3 story books. As you guys know here, if I'm reading an author's backlog, it's normally a sit down talking type of video, not like me vlogging my life. So I'll come in here after I read a little bit, I'll come in and I'll give you guys a check-in. I normally do 50% check-ins unless something interesting happens, and I'll check in every once in a while with those. I'm trying to think, I think there might be a few in here that could be cool to do a multiple check-in, but ultimately I think it's probably gonna be like a 50%. Let's get going. The first book, Bodies and Other Parties, recommended to me by a coworker named Michaela. She had recommended this book to me because she knows that I liked Marie Machado. We both really enjoyed the House one in Clock House or something out of those lines, which was her autobiography that she wrote, also written in vignettes. And this was written in a short story collection. I'd be really curious to read a full-length novel that's fictionalized, not written in truth, but in fiction. Some of these story ideas are great, and some of these are just, in my opinion, story ideas. Let's talk about it. I read the first 5, so we're going to review the first 5. And yeah, I think this was a good recommendation from the people who recommended it to me, and I can understand why. I really enjoyed her first book that I read, and some of these stories really do connect with me on a personal level, or I think are really well written on a writing level, on the actual nitty-gritty part of the writing level. This is also from 2017, so it's a little bit older, and so has a little nervous based on language and stuff, as this has to do with a lot of clearness, and I think I'm pretty impressed with everything going on. So like I said, I'm read 5 out of the 8 stories that are in here. Basically for short story collections, 1, if we were doing a traditional vlog, I'd be reading this throughout the entire vlog. 2, I tend to tell you a brief summary of what the thing was about, then my rating if I recommend. As I think for short story collections specifically, I think to make a hit or miss for me. I think in certain moments, I think that short story could work for you, but also others. You might want a 40-page story and you can get the book, and so you'll read that one and maybe the other one I recommend, but you'll skip the ones I don't like if our tastes are similar, that type of thing. So the first one we have is A Husband's Stitch. This is story number 1. The only thing I can really tell you about this one without giving anything away, it's about women in the society that have ribbons around their neck. That's all I can tell you. I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5. It was the perfect level of weirdness for me. Everything just hit at the right moment. Definitely recommend. Probably my favorite one out of the collection I've read so far. We still have a few more to go. We have Inventory, which is really interesting. This one has 2 elements that I really liked. The idea of talking about someone's sex life as a direct story point and having every story centered around the person they have sex with, and then the disease that follows that. I ended up actually giving this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It does not work perfectly. I think the idea is there though. Then we have Mothers, which I adore. This got a 4 out of 5. And yes, it does follow Mothers. Maybe not traditionally like you're thinking, but it does follow Mothers in the broad scheme of things. Then we have Especially Hideous, which is a Law and Order retelling. She decided to go through and retell about 9 or 12 seasons of Law and Order SVU, and it did not work for me. It's extremely long, it was really tedious to read, and I did not care. If you don't care about Law and Order, you probably won't care either. I find Law and Order fine, readable at that, but not for me. I give it a 2. It's a 2 specifically just because I think the writing's really good, but everything else failed. So a 1.5 to a 2. It's definitely the worst one I've read so far. And then Real Women Have Bodies. And this is about another virus that is making women over time disappear. The bigger message here, the bigger conversation, that type of thing, I think is handled so well. And I really enjoyed the characters and the idea behind it as well. I'm going to give this one a 3.5 out of 5, as not everything worked for me here, but it was good enough. So we have 8 Bites, The Resident, and difficult at parties, which I'm very excited for. The one that screams out to me the most, I'm going to say difficult at parties, the final one. I have really high hopes for the final one because the first one was so good. So I hope we can end the collection on a good note. The way I review collections at the end, my final rating that I'll put on Goodreads is the overall score. So I'll look at all the different ratings I gave all the stories, and then I'll figure out what number makes the most sense. Do I have a lot of 3s? Well, then it's probably a 3 or a 3.5. Do I have a lot of 5s? Well, then you know it's probably going to be a 5 or really close to a 5. A lot of 1s, you know how this goes. That's the first book we have to talk about. I will update you guys when I finish the collection. That is finishing off Her Bodies and Their Stories. I read the last few short stories between last night and this morning, so let me run through them really fast. I think we ended on 8 Bites was the one that I did not talk about. 8 Bites is about weight, really, honestly. If weight is a triggering subject for you, I do not recommend this short story at all. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's very timely, and it has a very unique message that is very, very clear throughout the entire process. And I think a lot of people, if you do deal with weight struggles or anything like that, I think the final 10 pages or so of it will hit you very hard, because you're just like, oof, I felt that. But also you're like, oof, I felt that, so I don't really know how good it is for you to read. Then we have The Resident, which is about a author going away and staying at this camp that she stayed at before, but this time it's a writing camp. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. When I first initially rated it, I think I rated it 2 because I said the message was very unclear. Well, and in my defense, I didn't actually read the end yet. I thought I did, but I did not read the end yet. And the message becomes pretty clear by the end, in my opinion. Not super clear, but pretty clear. But also, I think it just really stuck with me. I think I'm going to think about this one for a while. And then the last one, Difficult at Parties, is one that I had a hard time finishing. It's a very, once again, timely story, has a very clear pathway. It's about a woman who has a very hard time at parties due to something that happened there. And that's all I'll say about it. My favorite one by far, the one I recommend the most, is The Husband's Stitch, the first one, or The Resident, the 7th one. I will have to say though, on top of that, this is free on Kindle Unlimited right now, so if you do want to go pick up a copy, you totally can. The writing here is absolutely phenomenal, and Carmen Marie Machado, I ended up landing on a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and it was an excellent recommendation. Book 2 was recommended to me by a coworker named Jenny. She's relatively new into my life, and I'm sure we're going to become close book friends over time, as well as we've recommended several books to one another. And I was asking her the other day for great stories set in a post-apocalyptic world, as that's where my brain wants to be, which is kind of scary, but it's fine. And she recommended to me a book that's been recommended to me before, which is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And this, I know, jumps many different points of views and stuff, and it follows an outbreak. I'm pretty sure it jumps a few different timelines. I'm about 20 pages in. I have no true update for you guys yet. I just want to come here and tell you guys this is book 2. Alright, I'll talk to you guys when I have one. I ended up resting on a 3 for this book, simply for craftsmanship alone. To me, it's actually more like a 2, between a 2 and a 3 for enjoyment. I didn't care for the characters. It's a very character-based book. If you guys don't know what this is about, this takes place during the prior events to a pandemic and the after events of the pandemic, as if we decided to go down a different route. The pandemic itself is pretty self-explanatory, and it's actually kind of more annoying when you're going through the early stages. It's interesting for sure, obviously, because people are dying and stuff like that. I mean, sometimes you're just gonna have to lay beside me, okay? It's interesting because of different states or whatever, but in reality, I kind of experienced the epidemic that they experienced just a little differently. Our outcome was different, I think, was the biggest thing, but the way people reacted, whole 9 yards, was very similar to the way we reacted when, COVID was a thing. Parts of this were really boring because I was like, been there, done that, which was an interesting perspective. If I would have read this 3 years ago, I think I would have found those aspects more engrossing than either boring or unoriginal, just because now it technically is unoriginal. It was very true, and it was almost like watching a Simpsons episode go down, because you're experiencing something that someone had guessed in the past for the future. That's not to say that the book itself is a bad book. It's really well crafted. There's a lot of timeline jumps and things, a lot of flashbacks, a lot of Like, a character will be like, I was told never to read this book by my mom, and so when we had to leave the house because of something horrible, I decided to grab this book to take it along with me, even though it's one of the 3 things I was allowed to grab. My brother gave me a bad look, and then we would jump into reading that book, and then we would go backwards in time to talk about why that book was bad. Basically a whole subplot in this novel that goes on for too long. And it follows like fame people, which I do like. Fame people. These people are just not fun to follow. It's just the honest truth. I like the passing of time. I think some of that parts were really cool. And I'm pretty sure it was probably hard to write. I'm curious to see what her mindset is, how she does write. I would be really interested in like the craftsmanship behind this book. But for a book itself, I found it really boring and uninteresting. The more interesting parts were the caravan that's going around that they're searching for the 2 people apart. I found that part more interesting, even though I would say it's the least written. Like, I'd say it's the most underwritten part of the entire story. It does come more to fruition by the 3rd act, but it's so underwritten that the characters don't matter by the 3rd act, so any of the big reveals that are in the 3rd act, which there's only like 1 or 2 or 3, it's not as fun, in my opinion, because I didn't care for the characters. If you love the characters and you end up like reading this and you're like, I'm a big Shakespeare fan, and I do love the characters, I bet you anything you're gonna absolutely go hammered hard for this. But like, I don't care about Shakespeare, it seems like, and I don't care for the novel itself. That's Station 11. I'm not giving a great review. Just know that if you think it's for you, go ahead, give it a quick pixie. It might be for you. Start this next book in this recommendation video. This book was recommended to me by a friend of mine named Laurel. I talked about it before. I read her book. I'm excited to read this. I'm nervous to read this. I just read another one of T. Kingfisher novels, and I hated it, so I am a little nervous. All I know is that it's weird, it's dark, there's some fairy tale elements about a sister trying to save another sister, and there's some quest stuff. Fairy tale seems to be like the big thing. I also think the first chapter has to do something with like making a rabbit come back to life, and there's like a lot of flashbacks. We're gonna go backwards in time and forwards in time. I'm just excited to have like an original story, as the book I read by T. Kingfisher was a retelling. I don't know if it's true, but I think that's part of the reason why I didn't know what the fuck was going on. This is an original story from T. Kingfisher. I'm excited to see. We're gonna start Nettle Bones, and I will update you guys about the 50% check mark when I think of it, if I think it's worth your time. Very short. It's like a little under or a little over 200 pages. Like 230 pages or something like that. It's gonna be a pick-me-up. Hello, I want to give you guys a 50% check-in in Nettle and Bone. I had mentioned that I wasn't really sure what this book was about. I just knew that there were some quests involved and things like that. It's a very fast read. I'm halfway through it. I started it yesterday. By the way, the halfway mark is only like 120 pages in. The writing is relatively small though, and I would even say the world building is phenomenal for such a fantasy novel. And the opening chapter is so whimsical, beautiful, that's haunting. I loved it. We actually start out with our main character, Mara, as she is building a dog from bone. This is a very dark and gritty and like one of those stories you're just like, oh my god, where are we gonna go with this? And so she's quest with doing some challenges as she is wanting to kill the prince of their kingdom, as he is abusing his wife, her sister, and he is suspected of murdering her other sister who she was married to beforehand. He's abusing his wife so much for childbirth reasons. There's slight triggers for the stuff in here. There's like 2 chapters in here I was like, whoa, what the fuck? If you're like me and you have an awareness towards teeth, I don't like things involving teeth, and it's just like one of my things. It sets off certain triggers or whatever. I just don't enjoy it. This book does very much involve that, and I think it's going to involve it more in the next 50% of this novel. I think we'll see if it ruins my enjoyment of the story. Right now we're sitting at about a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I'm loving this book. The writing is phenomenal. The characters are beautiful, and it's such a meaningful story, and the quest makes so much sense. It's very straightforward. 3 different things. The witch that granted her this power was like, you know what? You could just like fail. That would be great, which I found hilarious. I don't know. Let me know if you guys have picked this up or not, because I would be so curious, as I'm enjoying it so much. I will be finishing it within the next like hour and a half or so. I'm loving it. Do not read the synopsis for Nettle Bones if you do end up picking it up, because there's a whole plot point that just got introduced, and I'm like 60% into it, which I declare a spoiler. That's how I personally feel about this. Like, you definitely don't want to know who else could be on this journey with our main character, or you really just don't want to know more than what I told you in the first set of clips for the 50% mark. When I finish it, I'm just going to tell you my wrap-up feeling, and if there's any big spoilers that I really want to talk about, we'll mention those too with the screen going gray. But I really just don't recommend. Honestly, I feel like it's a book you should probably go in pretty blind to, and as long as you know it's like a dark fairy tale, I think you'll like it if you're into that. Alright, I'm gonna come here and guys give you my final rating for Nettle and Bone. Nettle and Bone ended up being a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I'm not really sure why it's not a direct 5 personally for me, but it's very close to being a direct 5. I think this did. It was like super duper close to being absolutely perfect in my opinion. There's one part of it that just didn't hit the mark. For me personally, yeah, 4.5 out of 5. I will definitely be picking up more T. Kingfisher. I'm actually really excited to see what else that she has written. If I would like other horror that are not like retellings, because that was like the big problem with the last book I read. There were 2 books back to back, and this one was severely better. We are doing a try a chapter tag, which I did talk about for the last 2 books, as I'm not really sure what the vibe I want to go from Nettle and Bone to this newer story. I have 2 more stories I'm going to introduce who recommended to me. I don't have the exact reasons why these were recommended, but either way. We have Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Boley. I have no idea what this is about. It's pretty big. It is YA, and it was recommended to me by a coworker named Michelle, or just a personal friend now because I don't work there anymore. She recommended it to me because another one of our friends really liked it, and our reading tastes are very similar. I actually have a feeling I've been recommended this book before by that same friend. So that's the Firekeepers Daughter. I'm excited to figure out what that's about. And then the other book that we're going to be reading in this video is Robotopalopsye by David H. Wilson. This was recommended to me by a friend named Jen. She sent me a few different romances, and she actually decided on a sci-fi robot book where the robots take over the world. So, I think that's what this is about. I don't know if we're following a robot, like from the mind of a robot. That'd be pretty cool. I don't know. I also don't know what I really want from this story, or what the story could like give me. I have a lot of theories. I don't know. This is a debriefing, which is we're going to be reading. This is an actual chapter 1. So I'm going to read both these. I'm going to come back with an update when I finish one or the other. And whichever one is like, oh my god, I got to read that next. That's what we're going to pick up. Okay, so there's like a few things I want to take note with the Firekeepers Daughter specifically. I was not really expecting this to be set in one, like a modern day setting. I was also not expecting this to not be, like I said, the whole not being set in a fantastical world really took me by shock. Firekeeper is actually the last name of her dad's, like, how her dad grew up. Her mom is a different last name. It's like the Foundlinger, something under those. Fontaine is the one. This book is about our main character, who I've not really connected with directly, but I'm interested in knowing more about, having to give up her dreams to hopefully possibly save her family, is basically the vibe. The little bit of the synopsis that I did read, I read about part of the first paragraph, said that there will be a tragedy that strikes, and the very opening of this book does open with a paragraph, or a page I should say, right before, which was counted as the prologue of someone holding a gun and possibly shooting her, which I wonder if that's the catalyst, or if that's towards the end of the novel, because that part right there was lyrical, it was beautiful, it almost sounded like an open word poem in my opinion, and I was expecting that writing going into the book, only to be like more, like there's like a line in here which I'll read to you, which is in it's the very end of the first scene. I think really associates my opinion with the writing so far, and that is, when the cloud moves on, the sun reclaims her rays, a gust of wind propels me forward, back to my run, into the task ahead. You can really get a real association with the character, but you also get more like understanding what the writing is. Whereas you read that first page, which is beautifully written, it goes back and forth between gun, shock, disbelief, gun, fear, thump, 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 thump. The snub-nosed revolver shakes with tiny tremors from the jittery hands aiming at my face. It feels much more lyrical in my opinion. And we'll see. I will obviously read it. I just don't know if this is the one. I'm curious to see. I'm interested. I'm very interested. Very superstitions going on, and our main character sounds extremely interesting. And just, I don't know if it's like, we'll just have to wait and see on the end of it. Alright, moving on to Robotopalopsye. Okay. So, the debriefing for Robotopalopsye actually takes place after the events of the apocalypse. Like, this is definitely a prologue or a prelude to a bigger story that's about to be told. Kind of with the whole point, I'm assuming, the series is about, because this is book 1, I think, of 3, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know how much I enjoy knowing that we're building up to an ending like we are building up to. Like, somehow, in my opinion, sometimes I think some people do agree with me that our prologues are almost spoilers for the end of the book. So what's the point of reading the book once you already know the ending? I wasn't super impressed with the main character, who does seem like we're following throughout the rest of the story. I would know that I didn't start chapter 1, so who knows? It's also going to be a younger version of him, because I'm assuming that this robot apocalypse happened over a long course of time. He has taken upon himself, our main character, his name is Cormac Bright Boy Wallace. Is the very end of the war, and he decided to take it upon himself to document the entire thing. From how robots started off as your everyday handy appliance, becoming the killing machines that they end up becoming. They are called Robs in this story, and that is essentially what the prologue is about. We get introduced to a ragtag team that we probably won't see for a while, and then we also know one of the old leaders is dead, and that's it. Out of the two of these, one would think that I would choose a sci-fi one, because I would be more interested in the sci-fi angle of it. Also, I just did a similar story to this. I'm assuming with Nettle and Bone, or Needle and Bone, I don't really know though. Somehow this one made me a little more bored when reading the briefing. So we're gonna go with Firekeepers Daughter instead, which seems a little more up my alley. I'll update you guys when I'm a little bit further. And I'm really curious if this is just like a moment in life type of story. With a title like Firekeepers Daughter, it makes you want to think that there's more. But now that I know it's the last name, it might just be simply that. Yeah, there's 3 parts, so I'll update you with each part, or if nothing as important in my personal opinion has happened with the new part 2 starts, I'll update you halfway for sure on how I'm feeling, the vibes of it, and if I have any thoughts on the story, anything like that. We're gonna update you guys on Firekeepers Daughter. I have officially reached, I want to say, right above the century mark. We're 2 pages away from the century mark, and I have some thoughts. One, I did not realize, I guess I should have noticed because of the last names and stuff, this takes place about American Indians. I'm particularly excited about that, because it's been a minute since I read another story. I was planning on picking up a few of these. I have a few on my bookshelf that I've been meaning to read for a few years now, and this is excellent. If you guys are looking for one to read, a quick little recommendation myself is anything by Stephen Grant Jones, basically, but The Only Good Indians is fabulous. Very hard to read. Look up the triggers for it, but if you're looking for a fun time, or I guess a hard time, this also seems like it's gonna be a hard time. This is a very emotional suspense thriller drama. I didn't realize suspense thriller until Goodreads told me it was, and now I was excited. Essentially what happens is we have our main character who ends up liking a boy who's brand new in town. They end up going to a party out in the middle of the woods, and someone brings a gun. That's all I'll say about that. I just got to the inciting incident. It also has to deal with a lot of meth use, so if that's something that does not feel comfortable for you to read, not the way to go. It hasn't been overtly graphic, but it reminds me a lot of the beginnings of Angie Thomas writing, which I love. I'm actually planning on reading On the Come Up again this year, for this month. I'm super duper excited for that reread, and this just makes me excited for it as well. Alright, that's my update. I'll tell you guys again when I'm further, probably halfway. I'm gonna come in here and update you guys. I do want to mention what I'm about to talk about is in the synopsis, but because we are 25% into the novel, and I actually don't think it should be in the synopsis, I'm going to turn this into a black and white screen. If you guys don't know, this is my spoiler section. This is what indicates spoilers. We're gonna talk about Firekeepers Daughter. Like I said, we're 25% in, and it just brought up a trope or something on the lines of a suspense thriller that I do not enjoy. I can understand why it's here for 2 reasons, which we're gonna talk about. I'm going to first explain what that thing is, which is why I think it could be a spoiler. And the end of this is all about meth, which is a very complicated subject matter. But this being said, our main character has had several family members be at the hands of meth for whatever reason it might be, and also just in general her community. She is a high school student. This book does read more adult, even if the writing is more wide. That makes no sense. Like, to me, she feels like she's like 20 something. but the writing is like she's like 16. I don't think she's actually, I think she's probably like 17, to be honest with you, but then again, I might be just brooding into some other parts of the story, because I'm sure that's what you guys are curious about here. I don't know how I feel about it, because in order for her to figure out why meth is becoming such a huge thing in her community, she actually has to go undercover for the cops, which is the part that I don't like. I much prefer an amateur sleuth to my stories, even if this is like their first time ever sleuthing, because they want to solve the mystery of a crime that should never have happened. I like the superstition angle of it. I think that's really cool that's going on with the crime, but this whole sleuthing thing, I'm not liking. Honestly, I'm kind of hating. It hasn't even happened yet, but I'm hating the idea of it. I don't like cops being in my stories. I don't like detectives being in my stories unless there being a nuance. And maybe that's why I don't like them in my stories. I read enough thrillers in my life where there's just normally a problem, not like an actual like helping. It makes sense story-wise. I mean, if you read the book, you understand exactly why it makes sense. I just don't tend to enjoy it, and I wish you would have just told them to fuck off. The writing is really pretty. Other than that, that's the only like little gripe here. And I have a lot of questions, and I'm excited to figure out the answers. I'm also excited to see more of this character and how she's going to grow over the course of the novel, as we still have quite a bit of novel left. I think, see here, we got to page 100, a little under 130, and it's like 490 pages, so we have a lot of story left, so it can go a lot of different directions. I'm just nervous. I'm officially in nervous mark. Alright, I'm gonna let you go. I got a lot of reading to do. Weird. To update you guys on the Firekeepers Daughter. The Firekeepers Daughter, I'm halfway through, and I have really no big spoiler moments to talk about, or anything along those lines. I have some issues, and that's kind of where I'm at. I don't really like our main character. She's going through a lot. I like learning more of how you become part of the tribe, the learning aspects of it. Everything else is alright. I'm not really interested in the plot. It's fine. I think this book's a little too long for the plot, to be fair. I'm also not really interested in our main character either, which is really hard because the story is all centered around this one main character. And then there's this like subplot of a romance. It's like the B plot line, and it's been building this whole entire time, and it had a very interesting twist in the first 15%, but nothing really interesting has happened with it. It's just more like, oh, I trust you, oh, I don't trust you, oh, I trust you, oh, I don't trust you. I'm not really enjoying that aspect of it either. Plus, I don't know if this is something the writer does. There's a lot of repeating. Something will happen, then 3 chapters later, our main character retells us exactly what happened, word for word, by verbatim. This character did this. Well, let me tell you that this character did this. And normally it's not things that happen on screen, it's normally things that we hear about from another character who's telling our main character. There's also some very big remarks here. Part of the reason why she gets brought into this investigation is because she's really big into science, yet she's done nothing with science at all. There's been very little hockey, even though hockey is such a big part of this story. There's things like that that I feel like are very underdeveloped, and which we still have 200 pages left of the book that it could be developed. I will update you guys when I finish 70% into the Firekeepers Daughter, and my guess of what's going on I think is about to be confirmed in the next like 10%, and if it is, I don't really see the point of finishing it. Do I DNF for this video? I don't know. I finished the Firekeepers Daughter last night like I said I was going to. It ended up being a 3 out of 5 stars, maybe a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I'm not really confident. It's one of the two. The culture here is phenomenal, learning all about these different rules and populations and just in general how they treat the dead and what you have to do and like not being able to eat berries for like a year. Super small things that I found super interesting. I'm more interested in the actual plot. I heard if I didn't really enjoy this, I shouldn't read the other one on my list, but that one's more adult, so maybe I'll like it better. This one's still adult. It deals with a lot of triggering topics, so I don't really know. I would even classify this as YA. I can understand why it is. But moral story here is I didn't really like it, and I didn't really care for the reveals or the ending or anything like that. I didn't care for the characters. I didn't care for the romance subplot. This was a very big disappointing read. Moving on to the next one. Alright, the next one is Robotopalopsye. I did read the first chapter, or the prologue, or whatever you want to call it, in my first chapter tag earlier in this video, so we're going to start from there. I have 6 hours of reading I have to do today. Or, it's actually like, I don't know how long this one is. It's a little under 350 pages. We can do it. It's fine. I'll do it. I'll accomplish it. I believe in myself. Hi, I have an update. Robotopalopsye. I am about 20% in. Like, I wasn't really sure. What I do like about it is my friend had mentioned that it was a short story collection, and I was like, it doesn't say it's a short story collection, it just says it's about a robot apocalypse, and I'm assuming we're following this one guy as he retells the event. But no, we're getting a bunch of smaller events. Like, this last chapter I just read was a confined story about workers who realize that their older boss, who isn't giving everybody who should get a job, realize that he is like in love and dating a robot, and they find that very offensive. And it's like this whole conversation on interracial couples and racism, while also talking about different races and stuff, which was really fascinating. I think more of the lines what this actual story is about. They're little chapters in between. So like we have the tip of the spear, the Freshies Fogert, the Fluke, the Hearts and Minds, Super Toys. Like, I think these are isolated incidents, are the ones I'm reading about right now. Part 2 is 0 Hour, which I'm not sure what that means. Part 3 is Survival. Part 4 is Awakening. And Part 5 is Retaliation. And I don't think this is going to take us to the end of the war. This is getting a lot more fascinating than I would have hoped. And I would have probably have picked it up even quicker and left this one for the final book if I would actually have read the first chapter and not the part afterwards, because I think hearing about individual stories inside this world is much more fascinating if you're following one person experiencing this. When I'm about halfway through, I don't know when that is, but when I'm 50% in, I will update you guys again. First, let's do the outro for Robotopalopsye. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Was it a bad read? Quite enjoyable. Like I said, I guess the best way to explain how they tell the story here, in the first book, the first part, we're introduced to a group of characters, 8 sub-characters, 8 different stories. Some of these are important, such as Super Toys. Some of these are kind of like thrown away or whatever, like I had mentioned. And they are very much isolated incidents where robots are basically going all haywire. They're new to the world, but they're there enough that like you have very good understanding. And then part 2 takes some of those same exact characters, then some new characters, and goes into the exact like 0 hour of like this robot apocalypse story. So this is like where the world ends. That's essentially what it's kind of covering. Part 3 once again takes some of those characters from part 1 and part 2 and brings them into part 3 while adding a few characters as well. And it goes into deeper into the apocalypse where the war is beginning. The war is not set yet, and the robots are basically taking over. Part 4 is Awakening. Part 4 is very hard to explain without you reading the book, but it really is about humans trying to figure out how to solve the problem. And then part 5, Retaliation, is what it sounds like. It's Retaliate. Once again, you take a few characters and so forth and so forth. I have a few characters I really liked from the book that I was happy to hear from over and over again throughout each part, but it really felt very short story-ish. There are certain ones where I was about halfway through a short story and I was like, no characters are new to me. There's only like one instance where I did skip forward ahead. I just wasn't feeling it, which I do sometimes. I think I went back and I skimmed the rest of that story because in that particular story, there was a character that popped up in a later on story and there was a direct reference to the original. This is book 1. I will not be getting on to book 2, and that's okay. I liked it. Like I said, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Let's do a wrap up of the 5 books I read for this video. I first started out reading Her Bodies and Other Parties, recommended to me from a friend named Michaela. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars due to the ratings of the overall stories. There are some 5-star stories in here, and there are some 2-star or 1-star stories. Mixed bag, but I do love Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Marie Machado. I will be reading more of Carmen Marie Machado if she has more for me to read. Then I read Station 11, recommended to me by a friend named Jenny, due to the post-apocalyptic elements in here, and I eventually gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, or 2.5 out of 5 stars, somewhere in between there. Did not like it, was not for me, but still would recommend. I don't think there's anything in here I wouldn't recommend. Then I read Needle and Bone, T. Kingfisher, recommended to me by a friend named Laurel. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and on certain moments it's 5, and other moments it's 4.5, so it's just going to stick it at 4.5, but I loved it. It was great. Probably my favorite thing I've read out of this video. Then I read Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Bowley, and I ended up giving this one a 3 out of 5 stars. The idea was there, but the execution was a little not great. Then I read Robotopalopsye. Like I said, I just gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and so forth. If I had to put these in like an order of enjoyment from least to most, it would probably go in this order. That's the 5 books I read for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys all next time for another fabulous video here on my channel, and goodbye!